Hi, I'm Kent and this is Building an iOS App with C Sharp, Module 5. In this module we're going to design and build out our models layer. And in this first video I'm going to give you an overview of the design. So what I'm thinking is we will have almost at the top layer, top level, is this exercise program object or model. It will have a name, of course, and a collection of exercises. Now each exercise will have a name, and I think it will also have the number of sets in it and the number of reps in each set. Every exercise will take time to execute, presumably, um, and I'm representing that with this blue line here. Now, the way I see an exercise execution is as a series of events. So, for example, the first event would be that you're beginning the exercise. The next event would be that you're beginning the first set, and then beginning the first rep, and then ending the first rep, etc. So I've got a series of events here as examples, A, B, C, and D, and each event can have actions associated with it. In this case, we've got a set of actions associated with event A. And similarly for B, event doesn't have to have actions associated with it, which is the case with event C. And event D does. But notice that I've also tried to represent time on the horizontal axis here, such that event A, B, and D actually take up time, whereas C doesn't have any actions associated with it. So the exercise immediately progresses onto event D. So it's actually the actions that are taking up time, not the events. And as I say, there can be any number of exercises in an exercise program. Now, the core abstractions I wanted to kind of identify here, because these are the first pieces that we'll have to build out as we progress through this module. First one here is exercise program. Then exercise, event, action, and then we've got an event matcher, which basically says for this event, this action is relevant or this action is not relevant. And this will give us much more flexibility in how we actually specify an exercise program, as we'll see later. Next up, I've got this idea of an execution context. Now, every other piece of the model, I want it to be immutable. But of course, at some point we need state to change, otherwise, the program won't be much use. So the execution context is this object that will exist throughout the execution of an exercise program. It will store state and it will update that state as the user progresses through the exercise program. So for example, it would have where we're up to, as a time span in that exercise program. And it would have a flag indicating whether we've paused the exercise program, etc. Now the last bit I wanted to mention here is this exercise programs model, which is essentially just a collection of exercise program objects. And it's the exercise programs object that we would first grab a hold of when the app opens up so that we can give the user a list of exercise programs to choose from. So the events I see us needing are firstly a before and after exercise event. So there's two separate events here, before exercise and after exercise. Similarly for sets and reps, and also I want to have a during rep event. Technically I don't think we need it, I just think it might make things a bit clearer to say that these actions are part of the rep itself rather than something that happens before or after the rep. Now the actions I want to build out are a sequence action, which is just an action that executes any number of other actions in sequence. Parallel action, which is an action that executes any number of other actions in parallel. A wait action, which will just use our delay service to wait for a specified amount of time. A say action, which will use our speech service to say something. an audio action, which will use our audio service to play some piece of audio. A metronome action, which will allow us to simulate a metronome so that the user has some kind of timing information as they're doing their exercise. A break action, which will tell the user they're on a break and then wait a certain amount of time. And a prepare action, which will tell the user to prepare for the exercise and then wait for a certain amount of time as well. Now these last three actions, metronome, break, and prepare, can all be built out of the more primitive actions above them. So there is definitely a separation here between primitive actions and higher level actions. I'm not sure whether we're going to manifest that distinction in any way in the code, but it certainly exists. Now the event matches we talked about briefly, but the idea is that you would give it an event and it would return true or false depending on whether some associated action should be executed for that event or not. So the first one we'd want is a typed event matcher, which would just say if the event is of a specific type that you tell it, then it will return true, otherwise it will return false. So in that way you could have some action execute only for a specific event, like when the exercise first began. And the other one we're going to want is a numbered event matcher. Quite a few of our events, like before and after a set, before and after a rep, they will all have numbers associated with them, which is the set or rep number. So if we want to be able to discriminate whether an action runs based on the set number or the rep number, then we'll be able to use this numbered event matcher to do that. Now the final thing I wanted to talk about here is parsing, which is basically how we're going to go from our text document stored in iCloud to our models layer. So here's an idea of what I foresee the text document to kind of look like. You may remember way back in module 1, I think I mentioned that I wanted the exercise program document to be a subset of Markdown, which is what we're going for here. So the first stretches title is an exercise program, and then hamstrings, by virtue of being title level 2, is an exercise within that exercise program. And then you can see that we're giving it the number of sets and reps in that exercise. And then we've got this ability to associate actions with events. So in the first case, we've got before, which is the event, which is basically before exercise. And then we've got prepare for 10 seconds, which is the action. And then underneath that, we've got a slightly more complicated example. We're saying before set 2, do these actions. So that will only execute before set 2, not before set 1. And then there's an even more complicated example further down in the push-ups exercise, which is part of the upper body strength training exercise program. We've got this after set caret last, which basically means after every set except for the last. So I'm shooting for some syntax here that will allow us to, will give us great flexibility in how we specify our exercise document. So the idea is we take this document and we need to parse it into our exercise programs model. And the way I'm intending on doing that is using a third-party library called Sprash, which we will get into at that time. Now the approach I want to take for this module is to firstly build out the core abstractions that we identified earlier. After that, we can build out our events that we talked about. Then we can do the actions and the event matches, and then finally we can do the parsing bits. So that's it for this video. Hopefully that gives you a good idea of where we're going in this module. It will be a lengthy module, I think, but this is the heart of the application that we're dealing with here, so I think it's worth giving it the attention it requires. So that's it. Thank you, and catch you in the next one. Cheers.